Murdered by her mother, the little girl who suffered injuries like a car crash. Aisha Jane was 3 months short of her second birthday. Catherine Smith was also convicted of cruelty. Stepfather Matthew Rigby of causing or allowing her death.
Harrowing, horrible, heartbreaking. 21 months old, she'll never reach her potential. What would she have gone on to be?
As questions are raised once again about the role of social services, we ask why so many young children are fatally failed.
Also tonight, Corbyn says Cameron misled the public and lost their trust with his offshore investment admissions.
The last missing terrorist from the Paris attacks arrested in Belgium.
And why there may be more than luck in picking the winner of tomorrow's Grand National.
This is the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Charlene White.
Good evening. Aisha's injuries were so severe they left her looking like the victim of a car crash. Those injuries were inflicted by her mother, 23-year-old Catherine Smith, who described the little girl, not yet 2 years old, as her happy, smiley daughter. Stepfather Matthew Rigby was convicted of allowing it to happen.
Aisha has suffered a pattern of concerning injuries, twice needing hospital treatment. She'd been of interest to social services all of her short life. But as Ben Chapman reports from Birmingham Crown Court, warnings were not enough to prevent her death.
Aisha Jane Smith, who was known as AJ, was described as a happy, smiley toddler, killed by the one person who should have kept her safe. Her mother, Catherine Smith, stamped on her daughter so hard her injuries were like those of a car crash victim. Her partner, Matthew Rigby, was also convicted today of allowing it to happen.
Harrowing, horrible, heartbreaking. 21 months old, she'll never reach her potential. What would she have gone on to be? And you'll never know that, and that's what always touches at my heartstrings.
On the day of AJ's death, the next-door neighbour at the family's flat in Burton-on-Trent heard shouting and screaming an hour before her mother called 999.
She's floppy, she's lifeless, she's not breathing.
Can you see her chest moving up and down?
No.
OK, where is she at the moment?
She's on the floor.
OK, did you say she was having a seizure?
Yes.
But she wasn't. AJ had suffered a torn heart, and these graphics prepared for the court show the other injuries doctors found going back months. That was despite having been supervised by social services since her birth, taken into foster care once before because of her mother's previous abusive relationship. Naomi Pantal was Smith's best friend. She told me she often saw her hitting AJ hard. She wasn't feeding her properly, and that the warning signs should have been obvious.
She'd lost her hair, she'd lost weight, she'd lost colour. You could just see it was like the life had just been drained out of her. And if they couldn't see the difference between the baby they dropped off and the baby that AJ was turning into, then they shouldn't be working with children.
Smith and Rigby stored cannabis in AJ's drinking cup, and her concerned natural father took these photos of her with hand marks on her face 5 months before she died. A health visitor ordered a child protection medical review in January 2014 after noticing cuts on AJ's face. The next month she was rushed to hospital with what was later found to be a bleed on the brain, but the court heard doctors didn't check for signs of child abuse. In April, social services discussed but decided against taking AJ back into care. By May the 1st, despite 6 visits by social workers in her last month, she was dead. One of them, Steve Crean, sent a text asking to see them again just an hour before AJ's death. He told the court there were no safeguarding concerns about violence and has since taken early retirement. Both Smith and Rigby have been told custodial sentences are inevitable, but questions remain about why AJ was allowed to stay with them until it was too late.
Tonight, the children's charity Kidscape says AJ's death has echoes of previous notorious child abuse cases like that of baby P. It says it's extremely depressing. The murder of another vulnerable child who was known to children's services and who was the subject of a child protection order. A statement issued on behalf of the agencies who were involved in AJ's life says a robust, serious case review is now underway to identify any lessons that can be learned.
Ben, thank you.
Well, the case of Aisha Smith once again raises questions about the role of social services and whether failings identified in previous cases have led to any lessons being learned.
Our social affairs editor Penny Marshall has been to Coventry, where a service that operates in the shadow of one of those tragedies has rededicated itself to preventing another.
Every time a child known to social services is killed, the nation shudders. It might have been a parent who was meant to love them who killed them, but there are sometimes accusations that those who were meant to protect them failed them. One such child was Daniel Pelker, murdered by his mother and stepfather in Coventry.
Hi Amy, it's Olivia, social worker from Coventry.
Daniel died 4 years ago, but the team at Coventry Social Services work under that shadow. Many of the staff are new. A recent recruitment campaign used the slogan, "Do it for Daniel," and no one here can forget. The new team, though, is trying to move on and improve.
It's not social workers that harm children, it's often their parents. And we ask social workers to do a really difficult job day in, day out, managing really complex situations and managing high levels of risk.
In the wake of Daniel's death, Coventry was criticised for the heavy caseloads and lack of information sharing.
Obviously, a very busy place.
Yeah.
They say that's changed, with police now working alongside social workers.
We've got health, probation, police, social care. There's also education here. We have access to housing records and everything. So every piece of information that would help us build a holistic picture around any vulnerabilities.
But the national picture shows social work remains a pressurised profession. The latest official figures say the number of child protection orders in England's been rising, up from 39,000 in 2009 to nearly 50,000 last year, an increase of 27%. And staff figures have improved little to keep up. Staff turnovers rising, 16% last year compared to 9% 4 years before.
Well, there's an increasing referral rate, which is partly, I think, that families are facing more adversity and therefore it impacts upon their parenting. But it's also that some of the other services that would have helped parents with lower level problems have been cut back, so that families' problems escalate to the point where they get referred to social workers.
Judged inadequate in 2014, the team at Coventry say they're working hard to improve for the sake of thousands of children they're currently protecting and in memory of the one they failed. Penny Marshall, ITV News, Coventry.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has accused the Prime Minister of misleading the public and says he's lost the trust of the British people. That follows David Cameron's revelation on this programme last night that he did profit from an offshore fund set up by his father. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan has the latest.
Easter started so well for Mr Cameron, but as the holidays have worn on, the steel crisis and then the Panama Papers have given him headaches. And his admission to ITV News that he did hold shares in his father's offshore fund has not been enough for his critics, who are keen to paint his actions in a negative light.
I think David Cameron has got big questions to answer. It appears as if this information has had to be dragged out of him. The comments he made earlier in the week would seem to suggest that there was nothing that he had to reveal about his involvement with his father's offshore funds, and that turns out now not to be the case.
The Prime Minister's answered all the questions he needs to answer about his tax affairs, hasn't he?
Well, I think there's some issues that we need to explore further. There is a matter of trust. You need to be able to trust your Prime Minister, and the fact that he couldn't answer a straight question straightforwardly, straight away, I think has undermined the trust that we have in him.
We now know that Mr Cameron sold his shares in 2010, just before becoming Prime Minister, having held them since before entering Parliament. He told ITV News that he had paid all relevant UK taxes.
I'd paid income tax on the dividends, but there was a profit on it, but it was less than the capital gains tax allowance, so I didn't pay capital gains tax, but it was subject to all the UK taxes in all the normal ways.
But the fund itself wasn't. Blairmore's 2006 prospectus, when Mr Cameron was still an investor, said the fund will not be subject to United Kingdom corporation tax or income tax on its profits, but added shareholders resident in the UK for taxation purposes will be liable to UK income tax or corporation tax, which is what Mr Cameron paid and why ministers say he didn't reveal the shares earlier.
I think his natural reaction was, I know I've paid all of the tax due, I know I haven't avoided any tax, this is a private matter and I want to protect my family. But of course, what he's realised is he's Prime Minister too. And as Prime Minister, you are held to a standard of openness that is different than a private citizen.
A standard of openness Number 10 may well wish they'd embraced earlier in the week, allowing the Prime Minister to concentrate on the European referendum rather than his tax affairs. But there's to be no let-up for Mr Cameron, at least not yet. Tonight, Jeremy Corbyn has called on him to make a statement to Parliament about all of this. And even now, in Number 10, they are preparing to release details of Mr Cameron's tax returns. I understand that they want to do that quickly, within the next few days, and that it will include information going back a number of years. It remains to be seen how much that tells us about his personal finances, but it does tell us that in here they want to move on from this quickly. It's doing them no good at all.
Thanks, Carl.
A man suspected of involvement in both the Paris and Brussels terror attacks has been arrested in Belgium. Mohamed Abrini was the last remaining suspect still being hunted after the attack on the French capital. Police are also investigating whether he's linked to the so-called man in the hat caught on CCTV before the Brussels airport bombing. Neil Connery reports.
Mohamed Abrini has been one of Europe's most wanted men since the Paris attacks. French police say he was detained today during a series of arrests in Belgium. More than 130 people were killed in the Paris attacks last November. Mohamed Abrini was identified as the man pictured in CCTV images alongside Salah Abdel Salam, one of the prime suspects in those killings. The two were seen at a petrol station en route to Paris 2 days before the attacks. Abdel Salam was arrested in Brussels 3 weeks ago. 4 days later, suicide bombers from so-called Islamic State killed 32 people at a metro station and the city's airport. Prosecutors are now investigating whether there's a link between Abrini and the so-called man in white wearing a hat seen on security camera footage at Brussels airport after those attacks. Neil Connery, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. 9 men are jailed for appalling and vile abuse of 8 girls and women in Rochdale.
And what is your tip for a winner at tomorrow's Grand National?
Lots of drink. Just go with the flow. Choose a horse with a big bottom, because that's where the power comes from.
You can't deny that. Those stories and more after the break.
Welcome back. Last night we reported on the new disaster in Ethiopia, which is facing its worst drought in 50 years. But were the right lessons learned after that famous famine of 1984? Well, our Africa correspondent John Ray investigates whether the aid that's been raised for the country since has been put to the right use.
Here they are clinging to life. Drought has taken from these desperately poor people what little they had. So survival for babies like Mohamed Abdu is by no means assured. His mother tells me her son has stopped eating and fallen sick. I worry all the time he might die, she says. History here is seared into memory of a famine that took hundreds of thousands of lives. Just ask Nur Barahaba. So many people in my village died, he remembers. 4 of my uncles and 5 aunts. There can be no repeat this time. A huge feeding program is underway. But the Ethiopian government alone cannot cope.
If the situation continues like this, we need the international community's support, because the situation become complicated.
30 years ago, Ethiopia was where the modern aid industry was born. Critics say this crisis is exposing its shortcomings.
Even in normal years, Ethiopia has become the biggest recipient in Africa of aid, and it seems no closer to breaking the dependency. One big problem is the huge increase in population. Put simply, there are now many more hungry mouths to feed.
The modern skyline of Addis Ababa tells you how much the nation has changed. Yet behind this facade, too many live in grinding poverty.
These problems don't go away overnight. They don't go away in a decade. I mean, this is a long haul process. And after every drought, we've said, well, what can we do better? And frankly, we have done things better.
Still, for now, Ethiopia is sending out another SOS to a world distracted by many other crises and hoping once again the world will respond. John Ray, ITV News, Ethiopia.
Here, 9 men who committed sexual offences against teenage girls in Rochdale have been jailed for a total of more than 120 years. Tonight, one of their victims has told ITV News that others in such situations must find the courage to speak out. From the court in Manchester, here's Damon Green.
Their crimes were terrible and went unpunished for years. Their victims were young and vulnerable, and what they made them suffer was enough to ruin lives. Hannah watched in court today as the man who attacked her went to jail for 23 years. As a victim of sexual assault, she's entitled to lifelong anonymity, but wanted to speak out about her pride in giving evidence and sending that man to prison after years of living in fear and in shame.
Finally, obviously, come out the other end, and that's why I've done what I've done and gone on the stand and got justice for myself, and not only for myself but for all the other girls as well.
I mean, how proud do you feel of yourself for doing that?
Very proud of myself, really proud of myself. I've never ever been proud of myself in my life, ever.
The crimes took place in Rochdale in Greater Manchester, 42 separate offences over a period of 8 years against 8 different girls as young as 13. One young woman from the town who gave evidence told me how she was groomed as a teenager but never realised she was being abused.
I was 15 when I met him and he was like 28.
And to you it seemed you were just having a relationship?
Yeah, he was always there for me whenever I needed him. Until you get a bit wise and you realise it's just use and abuse.
Of the 9 men sentenced, 8 were of Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage. Afrez Ahmed was a drug dealer known as the Warden because he had worked as a neighbourhood warden. Chaudhry Hussain was sentenced in his absence. He was given leave to attend a family funeral and fled, possibly to Pakistan. Muslim organisations say British Asians accept in Rochdale and elsewhere grooming is a problem.
When it comes to the issue of on-street gang grooming, there's an overrepresentation of Pakistani men. That's not prejudice, that's not racism, that's reality. That's what the figures tell us. And so yes, as a British Pakistani community, should we be doing more? Yeah, absolutely.
Hannah now has 2 beautiful children and a partner who cares for her. Her problems, she says, are behind her. But she has advice for any young girl who suspects she's being abused.
If they're providing you with alcohol and drugs and taking you to places that you've never been before and stuff like that, then more than likely they're just using you for sex. And just take yourself out of the situation, speak to your parents, speak to the police, because they'll support you every step of the way. I got justice, so they'll get justice.
121 years and 6 months behind bars for the men who carried out those crimes. The police operation which brought them to justice still continues. Damon Green, ITV News at Manchester Crown Court.
A man's being questioned over the murder of a police officer after human remains were found at a property in South London. 59-year-old Gordon Semple went missing a week ago. Forensic officers are searching a flat in Southwark.
Pope Francis has called for the Catholic Church to show a better understanding of marriage in modern life. He made no changes to church doctrine, but urged more compassion towards Catholics who are divorced or remarried.
And boxer Tyson Fury is set for a rematch against Vladimir Klitschko. It'll take place in Manchester on the 9th of July.
Finally, the 40 horses scheduled to run in tomorrow's Grand National have literally hundreds of millions of pounds riding on them, even if your share of that is just £1 or £2 in the office sweepstakes, like we did. You may have wondered how to pick a winner.
Well, our sports correspondent Ian Payne has crunched the numbers to see if there's a pattern, a formula that might just help. He's at Aintree now. Ian.
Yes, Alistair, we are on the eve of the biggest betting day of the year, and everyone out there will be thinking the same thing. How do I pick the winner of the Grand National? Because tomorrow is a day when many people who never ever bet decide to have a little flutter. Well, we've been doing a little bit of research here at Aintree today, a day which is always one of the most colourful in the racing calendar.
Yeah.
Ladies' Day at Aintree. And luckily the weather was fine, so the colours on show could stay dry. But already thoughts turn to tomorrow and theories on how to pick the winner of the National.
Lots of drink.
Just go with the flow.
I like greys.
Greys.
Yes. If the horse looks nice as well and well kept and yeah.
And here's two more theories from jockey Katie Walsh in the blue jacket, who rides tomorrow in the big race, and Laura Wright, who'll be singing the national anthem.
Choose a horse with a big bottom because that's where the power comes from. So that's what I'll be doing.
So is it just luck for the jockeys?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously Many Clouds is favourite because he won the National here last year. Savinato Conti will be second favourite. He's a very good horse. He was placed in the Gold Cup, and you'll know by the market as well, by the way the prices are.
So what about the people that set those markets? The bookies say, don't back an outsider.
We think now 50 to 1 shots don't win it anymore. I say professionals have got this race down to a T. It's going to be something in the top 10, I think.
So you've never bet on the National before, you've no idea what bookmakers are, and you've no idea who's going to win tomorrow. So what do? Well, we've put together our very basic top tips for making some money. Well, 9-year-olds have a habit of winning. They've won 44 of the 168 races to date. And how about picking by letters? In the last 8 years, 7 of the winners' names ended with an S or an E, including last year's winner, Many Clouds. And based on the last 24 years, the average odds for winners is around 24 to 1. But don't dismiss just luck. Devon Locke should have won in 1956. Then this happened. This time tomorrow, we'll all have met someone who backed the winner, and they probably won't have studied the form. Ian Payne, ITV News, at Aintree.
And on our website, there are more tips and information about tomorrow's lineup. Go to itv.com/news.
Family names can help, like Oscar sometimes as well. That is it for now. Tom Bradbury will be here with the news at 10.
But from all of the team here, have a very good evening.
And a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.